First, I'd like to show a quote from Henry Edward Cardinal Manning about the apostasy of Rome, okay? Because as I mentioned in episode 1, there are many people, mostly, Novus Ordo people, that kind of stuff, who believe that the very idea that Rome is pagan or heretical or has fallen away from the Catholic faith is somehow an absurd idea contrary to Catholic teaching, when in fact it is Catholic teaching that one day Rome will apostatize from the Catholic faith, and we are living in that day. Right now, our generation, we are the ones who were unfortunate enough to be born and live through the apostasy of Rome from the Catholic faith, okay? The prophecies that talked about it happening near the end of the world and stuff like that, well, we are the ones who actually are here to see it with our own physical eyes in our natural lives, okay? So, reading the slides now. This apostasy of Rome near the end of the world from Catholicism and the papacy was foretold by Catholic saints and fathers for millennia. There is nothing Protestant about this doctrine. Many, Novus Ordo people would call someone a Protestant for saying that Rome is now heretical or lost the Catholic faith and stuff like that. No, it is actually Catholic teaching, and it is consistent with Catholic teaching to recognize that currently Rome is no longer a Catholic city, okay? Rome is not Catholic anymore. Rome is now heretical, pagan, whatever you want to call it, is not Catholic, okay? Beginning the quote here, it says, "The writers of the church tell us that in the latter days, the city of Rome will probably become apostate from the church and vicar of Jesus Christ. The apostasy of the city of Rome from the vicar of Christ and its destruction by Antichrist may be thoughts so new to many Catholics that I think it well to recite the text of theologians in the greatest repute. First, Malvenda, who writes expressly on the subject, states as the opinion of Ribera, Gaspar Melas, Viegas, Suarez, Bellarmine, and Bolsius that Rome shall apostatize from the faith, drive away the vicar of Christ, and return to its ancient paganism." Malvenda's words are, "But Rome itself in the last times of the world will return to its ancient idolatry, power, and imperial greatness. It will cast out its pontiff, altogether apostatize from the Christian faith, terribly persecute the church, shed the blood of martyrs more cruelly than ever, and will recover its former state of abundant wealth, or even greater than it had under its first rulers. Then the church shall be scattered, driven into the wilderness, and shall be for a time as it was in the beginning, invisible, hidden in catacombs, in dens, in mountains, in lurking places. For a time it shall be swept, as it were, from the face of the earth. Such is the universal testimony of the fathers of the early church." This is from The Present Crisis of the Holy See, 1861 AD. Now, I would like to mention regarding, because I alluded to this in episode 1, but I didn't get into much detail about it. When it mentions Rome shedding the blood of the martyrs more cruelly than ever, right? Once again, we must remember that basically not every single detail of everything that each church father or theologian said may be what actually happens. It can, some of the stuff they say would be like an educated guess or an educated inference, you know what I mean? And so they may get certain details, like for example, they may say that Rome will, return to its imperial greatness and stuff like that, right? As a kind of their understanding of the scripture and stuff like that. But it doesn't mean that every single little detail that each individual theologian or church father believed would be accurate or be how prophecy will actually be fulfilled. Do you understand? So according to Malvenda here, it is the universal testimony of the early fathers of the church that the church will be scattered, driven into the wilderness, and be invisible, that kind of stuff, right? But regarding shedding the blood of the martyrs more cruelly than ever, of course, that is not taking place in a public sense in our time. So I'm inclined to believe that, because I know that the Bible, the book of the Apocalypse talks about the blood of the martyrs being spilled and that kind of stuff by the whore of Babylon, which many interpret to be Rome and that kind of stuff. So there are many possibilities regarding that. And I've read, of course, the like Douay Rheims commentary on it and stuff like that as well. So that's kind of informing my thought process here. Basically, the shedding of the blood of the martyrs, if you look at it in our time, there are several ways to consider it. One way you could consider it is that the blood of the martyrs is being shed more so metaphorically, because the church is like being completely, like the church has been beaten almost to the brink, to its brink. You understand what I'm saying? So like the Pope is currently in hiding, his cardinals are in hiding, all this kind of stuff. Almost no one on earth is Catholic anymore. People who, would have perhaps fought against the Novus Ordo revolution at the beginning have been, taken out, or perhaps they've been assassinated, they've been suppressed, they've been, taken out of their office and removed from their office and basically given no voice or no power, that kind of stuff. Like today, basically anyone who is in any way like a public figure that is like interacting with the Novus Ordo is going to be, canceled and silenced and persecuted, that kind of stuff. You understand what I'm saying? So the truth is being abused and suppressed in that manner. So you could think of the blood of the martyrs being shed in that metaphorical sense, where the church is being absolutely just decimated on a religious and moral level. Not necessarily that, every real Catholic is being martyred in the Colosseum, like how you would have seen in the early days. But there's another way to consider the shedding of the blood of the martyrs, which could be, for example, I'll get into this in more detail later, but it is my understanding that people who were, let's say, involved with the exiled hierarchy, the exiled Pope, and that kind of stuff, ever since 1958 until now, their lives have been in very great danger. Some of them have been assassinated and that kind of stuff. And that would explain why today the Pope does not, he chooses to not show himself publicly, because if he were to do that, unless God were to, of course, strongly intervene, naturally speaking, it is very likely he would be assassinated. Okay. So the blood of the martyrs being shed could be expressed in that way, in the way that the exiled hierarchy, many of them have been killed. The Pope himself is in danger of being killed. And in fact, as you will see with prophecies we'll discuss later on, God willing, in this presentation, there is a prophecy stating that the Pope in his exile will die a cruel death. Okay. So I believe personally that the current Pope will probably be brutally killed before this crisis ends. So the shedding of the blood of the martyrs could be understood in that sense as well. And there's a third way to consider it. A third way to consider the shedding of the blood of the martyrs is that is not actually applicable to our specific time, but is applicable to the future, when the actual Antichrist will be on the earth. Because it is pretty much certain that when the actual Antichrist is on earth, Catholics will literally, physically be like martyred, tortured, that kind of stuff. Okay? So you can understand it in that manner. And I think, as with most prophecies, they're very cryptic, and it could be God's will that you're supposed to understand them in different ways, different levels. Like one phrase may mean several different things, and it may apply to multiple time periods. You understand? The shedding of the blood of the martyrs may be meant to be understood metaphorically in our time, but meant to be understood literally and physically in the future. Okay? And I say it is pretty much certain that the Antichrist will be martyring Catholics and stuff like that, because I mean, basically every church father I've seen talking about the Antichrist and the Douarim's commentary and stuff, they all talk about the Antichrist literally martyring Catholics. So I'm not aware of any church teaching that says otherwise. So that's why I said pretty much certain. It might actually be just like a straight up dogmatic truth, right? I'm just saying that I'm not absolutely certain about the level of the dogmatic level of that understanding, right? But as far as I'm aware, the Antichrist will certainly be martyring Catholics in a very literal, physical sense, not just metaphorically, okay? So yeah, and of course, regarding the church being scattered, driven into the wilderness, being invisible, that is what is happening right now. And that is why most people who recognize that there's a problem with modern Rome, they reject the anti-popes, that kind of stuff. Sedevacantists, for example, because they don't see a pope, they jump to the conclusion that, oh, therefore there's no pope. But no, there's a pope. Prophecies have spoken of there being a pope during our time and him being in hiding, being unknown to the world and all that kind of stuff. So all that's happening is that because the pope is invisible and hidden from most people, you assume that there isn't a pope because you don't see one, which is not accurate. There is indeed a pope. He's just hidden from the world as prophecy said he would be.